Well,
I,
yeah, and that kind of actually,
I take
I just
issue with like getting profit that way. Like if there's a better way to do something that's cheaper and more efficient and stuff,
well,
like yeah, it was great you made all that money, but like now, like especially with medicine, right?
mhm. Well, okay, then let's make this like a two part episode, I guess. Let's segue into something that kind of connects with this. And I was actually this was the idea that I forgot that, so we can have this kind of
Kismet.
yeah double episode basically that uh so in my opinion all information should be free. Free is in freedom, not free beer. um that's an important distinction.
Hmm.
But information should be available to everybody. All information. Maybe obviously like personal information like your passwords for stuff, your bank account balance. Yeah, that people don't need to know that. But
I'm
just
talking
I'm
about
talking
general knowledge
yes,
and
general
discovery
knowledge.
and things like that. Yeah.
Yep. It shouldn't be hidden behind paywalls. It shouldn't be things that only academic people have access to, or only, like it's controlled by businesses and things that all information, because I mean, we want to make the world a better place. And
Mhm.
sharing information and ideas together across the whole planet is one great way to do that. Instead of things being compartmentalized, it's like it should almost be like uh, the Library of Alexandria, right? Where
Right.
everything that was ever created is stored and everybody can just go and see it and read it and share
Yeah.
information.
I mean, I think that's a great idea. I I think it's very interesting coming from your perspective of anarchism. Like
Mm-hmm.
in a way, it fits, right? But in
Yeah.
another way, like where you might usually make an argument for, well, a business should be allowed to make profit and stuff. A lot of the times, that profit comes from proprietary information.
Yes. And well, and
So,
this goes into like the whole right to repair thing, um,
uh,
which I firmly believe in. That right to repair, we should have access to the same service manuals that say HP has for their printers. We should be able to see that, and because I think people should be able to fix their own things and have
mhm.
access to parts and documents and things. And that's just one aspect of this, but I think it should apply to everything. Um, and it wouldn't, yes, it does kind of affect, I guess, the profits of a company. But here's the thing, like Apple isn't one of the biggest electronics like manufacturers in the world because they control their information. It isn't because of that necessarily. Maybe they can charge more because of that. But people go and stand in line in the rain all night long waiting for the next iPhone that costs like $1,500, not because they're trapped, but because they like Apple products, and because Apple is very good at marketing and they make a decent enough product that people keep coming back. And that's how you would make your profits, is just simply by being the best. And
Right.
that would be that, and it's like that doesn't require control of proprietary information at all to do
Yet
that.
they are kind of notorious for being the worst about that.
They Oh yes, they are. Oh yeah, like replacing parts and stuff like that. And it's like I look at that and I think that's unnecessary. That doesn't actually benefit them at all. I mean, maybe in like nickels and dimes sense, like, oh yeah, they've got to go take it to the Apple Genius store or whatever to get fixed. But like that constitutes such a small proportion of their profits that it really, fighting those battles isn't worth it. And all it does too, it's the same thing. Nintendo does the same thing with their
Yeah.
stuff. And what ends up happening is that gives the company a bad reputation. People now look at
Yeah.
Nintendo with disdain. It's
Exactly.
like now Nintendo is a big bully pushing around people who just want to make their own little hobby games or modify the game systems or even fix them. Um, and
Yeah, I was about to say, like, just like you can price yourself out of customers and sales, you can also do the same with your PR. You can kind of lose the potential for cornering the market on something by being an asshole, or, like creating this divide, Android versus Apple. And it's like, well, now you've kind of helped your competition by creating the competition, right?
Yeah, like creating that division.
Yeah. Like you'll never just wipe out every other competitor, because like you're not really like evening the playing field or anything.
Well, I mean, in the absence of government regulation, there will always be another competitor. There will always be somebody with a
Mm-hmm.
more clever idea than you. So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how big somebody gets, there will always be something. Like, I mean, think about this. Like, there was one
Well,
point in time when MySpace was the social media place, and now go
yeah.
look at MySpace. It even Facebook now is losing out to other things, and people looking at all Facebook. They're so powerful. Like, no, they're not. Look at their customers, or they're hemorrhaging people. Like Twitter too, same thing. They're going to other places,
Yeah.
and there will always be a new idea that will emerge that will capture the public's eye and take over and be the next thing. And
Right.
the same thing happens with any product, really. Like, whatever happened to fidget spinners, you know? Like, I mean, I have a few. They're fun, but like, yeah, that was a hot thing for a long time. It was $1 billion industry, and now
Jeez.
it's huge. But like, now it's
We
nothing.
should we should come out with widget spinners.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's like the wacky wall walker, the little sticky things you'd throw and they
uh,
roll down the walls and stuff. That was really popular. But popularity isn't forever, and
right. Yeah.
it either takes what will inevitably happen. Like, no company will command
Well,
dominion over a market forever, because either it gets too big and starts making mistakes, like making their products in less uh, like lower quality, inferior products, things like that, or somebody else comes along and they have a better product that maybe
but
is cheaper.
giants like Apple kind of stifle that, because they have the market so cornered. Like there's, you get that I don't know, binary sort of situation, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
it's Apple, it's Android. Like there are probably way better ideas that just can't get a foothold in the market,
Mm-hmm.
because like there's all this like, you know, uh lockdown on everything.
Well,
And
in that case, it's not necessarily like a legal lockdown. It's more like it just kind of emerged that those two platforms became the preferred platforms. And yeah, you're right. There are plenty of other things out there. The problem is, just like social media, is
yeah,
adoption. Like,
but
there may
it's
be
that
a far
legal crutch that allows them to maintain that hold.
sort of. I mean, you can still buy an Android phone. You can still buy a Windows machine. Like, those are still more popular. Windows is still way beyond iOS as far as popularity. And there's Linux. Like, that's a free option that is actually pretty good now.
Mhm.
So it's like things will inevitably flux at some point in time. Um, but I think the difficulty with certain things is adoption, right? Like, oh, well, I'm not going to buy this new phone that runs this way because there's no app store, or there's only like a few things and no developers are making things for it. So it's kind of like I can't really use it the way I can use, say, like an iPhone. iPhone, you get it, boom, there's an app store. You just get your apps and you have access to whatever you want, and it works, right?
Mhm.
And so that's where people who don't want to trouble themselves with either doing their own software development or waiting for something to become more popular, that yeah, there's a lot more of the people who just don't want to bother with that than there are people who want to go adopt something new and novel that may not necessarily, it may take a little more work to get it working the way you want it.
So, what do you think would happen to a company like Apple if information were obligatory, like all of a sudden just like you have to make it freely available to everyone, you know?
Well, there would certainly be copycats, but there already are copycats because I mean, reverse engineering is not like necessarily an arcane art. People
And
do
just
it
to be
all the
clear,
time.
this means like trademarks and patents have to go away, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It would like you basically there's no legal secrecy
Right.
for product information.
Yeah.
You would have copycats, but they wouldn't be as big because like that. The thing is, it's the quality of Apple's stuff is one of the things that sells it. It's also the brand recognition. People are willing to pay more just to have that little Apple on their device that's like a legit OEM Apple device. And I don't know. It's kind of almost like a cult in a way, which
It
I think
is.
we've talked about that
Yeah.
there is a cult, but there's not necessarily an Android cult. So that's kind of interesting. Um, but I mean, Android is open source, like the whole thing. It's freely editable and modifiable. Obviously, like depends on the device you have. Obviously, you'd have to root your phone or something in some cases. But the platform itself is out there. And yet you still have Samsung being huge and producing their Samsung phone, and people buy that. They spend almost the same as people who buying iPhones do. When you could go to like, I don't know, Walmart and buy yourself an Android phone for $40. So why do people spend seven, eight, $900 on a Samsung device when they don't need to? Well, it's because Samsung's build quality is better. Maybe their chipset is faster and more RAM and things like that. The screen might be better. Who knows?
Yeah.
And people come to rely upon that until reliability starts to subside. Um, I mean, I envision a time in the future when Apple's probably their product quality starts to slip, and somebody else comes in and they're the next Apple. Um,
I think if that was going to happen, it would have happened when Steve Jobs died. That's
Maybe.
usually where you see like a huge shift in the direction, like Wendy's when Dave Thomas died. It
Mm-hmm.
went from being like plump, juicy, fresh burgers to like these shriveled, dried out, like McDonald's patties, just square. You know, well,
Yeah. Well, I
something
mean,
akin to a square now.
yeah, there's obviously in companies there's the visionary that keeps things going, and they kind of set the course for the company, and that makes sense. But I think there's in the case of Apple, there's probably enough people that are still kind of at the top of the pyramid who still have that vision in their mind because they were so connected to Steve Jobs that they're carrying it forward, kind of like Gene Roddenberry, right?
Mhm.
Well, he died. Star Trek didn't completely fall apart after that. There were still a lot of people who kind of were still carrying forward that vision for a long time, and it wasn't
Yeah.
until I think what they were other big companies got involved that that vision started to kind of morph into something that wasn't quite
Yeah.
the same as Star Trek, Roddenberry Trek, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, even then, it didn't really change that much. Um, I think they were trying to do the Disney Star Wars thing,
Mm-hmm.
and just like flood the market with anything branded Star Trek.
It does kind of
Um,
dilute the property a bit.
but yeah, I mean, you're right. Like Roddenberry died halfway through the Next Generation, and you can't
Mm.
really like point to an episode and say that's definitely not Roddenberry on that.
Yeah.
Like they were really
Uh-oh. I think you got a signal issue there for a second.
eh,
You said they were what?
carrying the torch for Roddenberry pretty well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think
Um,
so.
yeah,
Sure. It's yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, well, for Star Trek, actually, that's an interesting thing because, as far as I know, one of the like in the contract or whatever, Roddenberry had some kind of clause for products that mimicked things in Star Trek. Like, if somebody could create a real tricorder, they could call it a tricorder. If
oh
somebody
wow,
created a real phaser, they could call it a phaser. So
that's
even
smart.
though it's a trademark of what is it, Paramount? I don't know who actually owns it now. Um, that
Yeah,
is still
that's right.
allowed. So if like, you and I sat down and engineered a working tricorder, we could legit call it a tricorder.
Huh.
That's kind of
Yeah,
neat, actually.
that's super smart because like that's just free advertising for your own product. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And whoa, that I think I know there was some wiggle room too for fan projects as well, but like the Prelude to Axanar is one that has been controversial because I know that they got like sued because it was a kind of a big budget project. It's a fan project, but it had a huge budget and was kind of looking a lot like it might kind of compete with Star Trek proper. So they got
Huh.
sued and stuff. And I don't know where they stand right now, but it looked like a really interesting project. But that's something that I think should be allowed is people making derivative things like, oh, here's my own story based on this. Like, oh, here's I wrote a book about the world of Dune, and it's not connected with that one, but maybe it is. You should be allowed to do that. Like,
Yeah.
because people, I mean, it's clear who the originator is, and they're obviously going to end up being the ones that people go to. You know,
Mhm.
the people will be inclined to watch the actual Star Trek stuff just as much as they would watch some kind of fan production. And that's the thing is like these fan productions just enrich the world of Star Trek or whatever. It adds more
So
to it.
you can kind of see that in the novels, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek novels and Star Wars novels are handled very differently in that manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Steak and Star Wars novels are all just kind of pre-authorized to be canon. Whatever they write is canon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can see how that totally works because like if fans are writing about something, I think you can feel relatively safe in knowing that they're not going to just like go and totally screw up the entire timeline on
No.
purpose,
In
right?
fact, the fans are the most like passionate about things being accurate. Fan
Mm-hmm.
stuff is they take pains to make sure that things connect, which is actually kind of disappointing of like some of the official productions, the corporate made ones that like deviate so heavily from established canon and kind of they almost seem like oblivious to what came before, like, oh, we're just going to go in this direction and stuff, and I think that disappoints fans. And well, hey, if there's a fan project that's accurate and people are like, whoa, this is exactly what it should be, and that gets all the attention, well, that would encourage the corporate side, like, hey, wait a minute, maybe we ought to pay more attention to canon and all the details that people care about. Like Star Wars is another one where people, God, they have encyclopedic knowledge of every last little detail,
Oh
you know,
yeah.
and
I'm like totally lost on that. Like all these characters that people can list. I think our friend Sutton is kind of like this, right? Like
yep. Oh
just
yeah,
knows like all of this stuff about Star Wars, and I'm like, who, what,
yeah,
what
exactly.
character? But
Yeah, but I think
I
that's
mean, there's also some interesting stuff that comes up from that kind of knowledge, like the whole question of whether or not Jedi's are actually the bad guys.
mhm.
That
And
that,
people
that
have
stuff's kind of
explored
interesting.
that in stories and things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's all perspective anyway, right? Yeah.
mhm, exactly. I don't know. I had a thought. I'll remember it in a second. Um, it nope. I'll remember it. Whatever. I'll come back to it.
That's always the way in these fantasy things, right? Like white magic, black magic, the
Mhm.
force, the dark side, and all this stuff. Like it carries all these connotations, but what's really bad, you know?
And ambiguity is kind of the way. Like
Yeah.
there is no real evil or good necessarily. There's blends of the two, and it's like how far towards those extremes are you?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you could be a blend of both, you know? It could be like
Mhm.
Robin Hood or something, or that kind of thing. Uh-oh, wait, more signal issues there.
Uh, I guess I don't get very good internet in my new location. Uh,
No, maybe a signal booster or something like that. Run a hard wire up there.
yeah, it's weird. I'm like directly above the Wi-Fi router,
Huh.
so can't really get any better.
Yeah.
But oh well. Um,
Well, so like again with Nintendo, it going back to them, the kinds of things they've done to people, it's so terrible and just akin to bullying, and it really puts people off of the brand, and it
yeah,
doesn't benefit them at all. It's like just let people make derivative works. It can only help you, and allow people to use the old IPs that you're doing nothing with, old games that don't sell, you can't get except used. Why not
well,
let
yeah,
people have
like
access to that?
Sega. Sega's not a thing anymore, but you still have Sonic the Hedgehog, and
Yeah, which is probably owned by some other company. Who knows?
I think Nintendo probably owns it. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. In fact, it's probably Disney that owns both of them now. They have like their hands in everything. Oh man.
Yeah, free information though, like that. I wonder how that would change the landscape of everything from entertainment to medicine, like things that
Oh,
really matter, things that are like, you know,
well, medicine
don't
actually.
necessarily matter, but like are
No,
interesting.
the medicine would be altered in a huge way, in a good way, if
Yeah,
you had access to all that information and patents weren't a thing, right? Somebody
right.
developed a thing and they would release it, and it would be anybody could make their own version of it. It's the same thing, like, people go to Bayer aspirin and they buy that because they trust it, even though aspirin is widely available from any other company for super cheap. And the patent has long expired long ago, that they still are like the big dog, which is kind of, interesting. But
It's a German company, by the way.
yeah, yeah, who may have a checkered past, just like many German like chemical and medicine companies. But the point is that there are discoveries in the medical world that are locked down, and no one can gain access to them or carry them forward because a company is just holding on to that and they won't let it out. And that harms everybody. Like we should have access to all this information, and be able to, like, it's not the domain of that one company to develop this thing or set it on a shelf. Like, it should go to other people who may have better knowledge or better other ideas on like what they could do with this material, or whatever, this product. And that would benefit humanity immeasurably.
The
Like,
only
we
thing
would
I
be
can't,
so far ahead of where we are now if patents were not a thing.
yeah, the only thing I can't really figure out is, having worked in the field, not to invoke the identity fallacy or anything, but I know how much cash is required to develop like a new medicine that works, that is safe, that
Mm.
you can show people with certainty is, all of the above. All that takes a lot of time and a lot of money,
Oh yeah,
and without the patent, you don't really recoup that so easily, right?
it might be more difficult. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So
certainly,
it's
like, yeah, it does cost a huge amount of resources to develop these things. And perhaps if you didn't have that kind of capsule you could put it in, it might discourage people from spending that kind of money on something that could immediately be taken by someone else. But the fact is, it already happens.
what
Like,
about
Chinese engineers and scientists, they reverse engineer stuff all the time and release unauthorized uh, copycat
yeah.
versions of everything. But yet, still, people go to the main source.
What if like the whole idea of a patent was, I don't know, like updated to more of a royalties sort of structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you invent, like, for all of time, anyone else that uses like a certain, say percentage of that kicks you back with a certain amount of money or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
like you could probably figure out some way of like kind of gauging how much of your idea is actually like directly being used.
In fact, that's a perfect application for AI.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we have the technology essentially to do that very thing. Um, and I think, yeah, I think you're right. Like these systems have been in place for centuries.
I mean,
And
that's fair. Like you
mhm.
should get paid for your idea.
Well, and I think honestly, like a company utilizing someone else's ideas should, just out of like gratitude, kick back something to the other person.
Right.
Like, hey, I'm using your
But they
thing.
put
If you
their own
use a
ideas on
song,
it too.
yeah,
Like, so it's the shoulders of giants sort of thing. Like
yeah,
we all get where we are from the work of others, no matter what.
exactly.
Like we can't avoid that.
True. And in a way, patents being existing kind of prevents that from happening, because then it
It
becomes like
does.
if you make your own, you use all the knowledge from thousands of years of scientists and engineers building stuff and coming up with ideas and dying and, one thing after another. And now you use all of that information to build your thing. And now it's seen as solely your product. Like you are the only one, it's yours. Like a musician
Yeah.
writes a song, right? And oh, they have the copyright and no one else can use it without their permission. Well, they didn't just that song didn't spontaneously come into existence necessarily because of them. Like
Right.
their all of their songwriting is derivative of other songwriting. It's inspired by, and they're using tools that someone else built. They didn't build their own synthesizer out, from scratch, or
Yeah.
code their own software or build their own guitar. No, it's someone else's product. And even them, like the guitars that you buy today are not guitars that were made by the original builder of the first guitar. You know, it's
Right.
it, centuries and centuries of development.
Yeah. And the system, the way it stands now, with having patents and being able to set a price on a thing, it really does stifle development because like CRISPR gene editing method is
Mm-hmm.
super awesome.
Oh,
Like
holy shit,
like
CRISPR!
like
Like that
the
is, oh,
the
good.
potential for advancement
Uh
is
huh.
amazing, but the cost of using it in an assay is like, well, maybe we'll find another way.
Oh yeah.
Like
Well, and there are probably countless ideas and products, all throughout industries of all sorts that are just sitting on a shelf somewhere that someone has a patent to, and no one can
mhm,
carry that forward. It's just
yeah.
sitting there. Like, okay, well, there it is, but they never bring it to market, and so no one has access to it.
You know
And no
what?
one's allowed to take that idea that no one is doing anything with and improve on it.
You know what? I won't name this person because some of what they were doing is probably uh, against some rules and regulations and laws. But a previous guest of ours uh, kind of created his own laboratory to uh, develop a cure for his wife's ailment.
Hmm.
And like the amount of like self teaching and research he did was pretty astounding. Like
Huh.
in terms of like biology, he kind of knew more than, right.
Wait, you kind of knew more than what?
He kind of knew more than I did, and he didn't have a degree in biology.
Yeah.
Like
Well, that's an interesting thing, and there's a whole like kind of pseudo underground group known as biohackers, which we should do an episode purely about that. But it's kind of in line with this all information should be free thing. They are sort of like just doing what, like hacking their biology or other biological systems, and building their own stuff. And it's kind of open source, like open source medicine in a way, which it honestly should be.
I mean, like, that's how a lot of medicine started. So there were, so we get into the question of bioethics, right? There were a lot of inventors. Some really famous stuff came about from people who experimented on themselves. You know, like,
I think it's reasonable to do that, like, because hey, it's your body, right? If you experiment on other people without their knowledge, that's a little bit, that starts going into unethical territory.
Right. But like, I can see the argument for not encouraging that, because there's a huge personal risk in that.
There is, but
like, it's arguable. Like, is your mind more valuable to live another 40 years, or is it like worth the gamble right now? Right.
Well, that is a whole nother question right there.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you're successful and you're able to develop a new and novel solution to a problem that potentially saves millions of lives, it might be worth it. I mean, soldiers who go into the field of battle put their lives on the line thinking, hey, if I don't stop the enemy right now, I'm sacrificing my life for all these children, or whatever, for my country or my culture or something. And I think it's probably one of the most human things we could do, is put our own life on the line for the betterment of others. And so I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing if it's done right. I wouldn't encourage ignorant, just like, you don't know anything about it and you're just drinking random chemicals and seeing what they do. Like, that's pretty stupid. But if you put together your own laboratory and you do a whole bunch of research and learn as much as you can and attempt to create a solution, sure. It's definitely worth it. Build a better mousetrap, essentially.
It's a good way to, like, reinforce your own knowledge too.
Exactly.
Like, make your own experiments, make your own mistakes, blah blah blah. I mean, imagine a world where I didn't blast myself with 12 grays of gamma radiation, and now when I get mad, I turn into Hulk and I save people.
That would be awesome. Well, and this is, when I was a little kid, in the world of programming and hacking and cracking and freaking and stuff like that, back in the day, that was sort of our ethos, was all information should be free. People shared all the information. Nothing was closed. You would discover something and share it. Like sharing source code for things, and people would build on it. And my God, how fast things improve at that point. It's like, in the 3D printing world, there's Thingiverse. So it's basically a repository of all kinds of different people's 3D designs that can be printed on a printer, and you could download them for free. You can also take them and derive new modifications from them and put them back up. So, and there's attribution, obviously, that there's a culture of attribution there, where people are like, hey, I took so-and-so's design and I added these things. And so it's like, they still get credit, and no one's making any money. I think some people do, because you can, like, I don't know, get special services or something like that. But in general, it's just completely free and open source.
Special services?
Yeah. No, not that kind. But people will print something for people. That's another thing, because not everybody has a 3D printer and knows how to use it. Not everyone wants to take the time to finish a product. And people are willing to pay for that.
That reminds me, I was going to ask you to 3D print me a light fixture, because it got broken and I can't find one. But anyway, that's a personal request.
Sure.
Just about it later, but
send me an email or something.
this actually like really kind of ties in with the first segment, which might even be its own episode. When it comes to the identity fallacy, it's like if you're not giving a chance to other perspectives, you might miss out on the next Einstein. Like
Yeah.
the next big idea is probably being stifled by other people saying, no, you can't. No.
Oh, not probably. It is. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like I have these beliefs and I live those beliefs. Like any code or creation, it's like, yeah, if somebody wants it, it's yours. Like, well, I just posted something to Facebook the other day with a little circuit that I built, and I included the source code for
Huh.
that circuit. I didn't include the schematic because I didn't want to take the time to draw it all out. But I mean, people could figure it out for themselves. It's pretty simple. But that's the thing. It's like, hey, here it is. I have no interest in keeping it closed. And the same thing with music and stuff. I think, hey, if somebody gives me credit, like, hey, oh yeah, this is that person's song, then that's fine. Go ahead and use it. Use it wherever. Change it. Make a I don't know, some kind of techno version or a remix or something. Like that's cool. I would be flattered. Um, and yeah, because I it's important for progress that we share information and that it should be people shouldn't feel bad about taking other ideas and making them their own or twisting them in some way or making improvements to something. That's how the world gets to be a better place. And we're slow for progress right now because of things like copyrights and patents and all
Yeah.
these legal, like litigious actions against people doing stuff. Like that slows us down. And yeah, I can't imagine what the world would look like today if those systems were not in place. Like if anybody could just take an idea and improve on it, it would be I have no doubt. Well, two things. If borders were less of a thing and wars were less of a thing, um, and then we had access to all information, um, we would be a starfaring race by now for sure. Like we'd be out
Oh
there.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Warp drive. Who knows? I mean, who knows what kind of amazingness would have happened? Um, but the fact that it takes like 100 years for something to go out of patent or copyright is just bullshit. Like
It
that.
is it is good that theoretical physics is kind of something that's, I don't know, like patent proof, I guess.
Mm-hmm,
Like because it's all stuff that you can't really say for sure whether or not it's actually achievable right now. So
mm-hmm,
it still leaves the door open for other minds to freely collect all the information that exists on that, right?
mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what it would look like, I think, if all information were free. It would be this nebulous cloud of like super interesting stuff to the people that find it interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would be like the world keeps turning for the rest of us, right? Like
Yeah.
we could take it or leave it whether or not there's a patent on, like light speed.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
you know, and
Well, if there
and
were,
really
that
when you
would
look at
really.
it when you look at it that way, like what would be the harm of having information be free?
I can't think of any harm, honestly. Well, in one rare instance of something connected to the U.S. government, NASA, their information is all available. Like, and not only that, but derivative capable.
What
They're
is
not
NASA though? Are they government or are they not?
quasi governmental. It's a private. It's yeah. It's
Kind of like the
complicated.
IRS, right? Like,
Well, more like the Federal Reserve, I think.
or yeah, like yeah, that's
But
that's a little weird.
that's a good thing, and you can see how much that helps society, even in its limited capabilities of what they're developing. But they develop these things to, out of necessity because okay, well, we're building a spacecraft and we need this or that, and they develop something, and it's now available for the public to use. And honestly, all of the stuff from the space program, the US space program, has helped us in ways we cannot calculate. Little things,
So
even tiny little things.
So the thought just came to mind though. It's all fine and good if the information is freely available. When it comes to something like space travel, money, for the resources themselves is a huge like blockade, right?
Oh, well,
Like
sure.
let's say like some Joe Blow gets all this like information freely available to him, and he develops a way to like make a like light speed drive, let's say, but
Mhm.
he can't afford it. Like shouldn't there also be like some kind of system where you could at least like petition the giants, the titans of that field to maybe
Well,
requisition you to like
you probably could, even as it stands now, because if somebody sees some kind of potential to like
yeah.
make money or whatever, then they'll fund it. You also, not only that, but you can crowdfund things. You can also build a team of people who can all contribute to build this thing. Because I mean, if it's that remarkable, hey, I figured out how to do warp drive.
But
Um,
well, okay, so I mean, like when it comes to space travel, though,
mhm.
like to on a serious note, like people really shouldn't be like doing this out of their garage because that shit is super dangerous.
It can
Like
be.
the amount of like super intelligent brains that you need working together in a room like night and day for years at a time just to do something like going to the moon and back.
Yeah.
Like that should tell you right there. Like
Yeah,
you're
wasn't
not
there
doing that in your garage.
400,000 people involved in the Apollo program alone?
Yeah, you
Something
can't
like
do
that.
that in your garage. Like
No, no,
nope.
and but you could certainly do small scale experiments, just kind of proof of concept stuff, like, hey, that
Mm.
do something that demonstrates things without it necessarily being a full scale finished product. Um, well, something like space travel, I don't see as something that is necessarily an individual or national thing. I think it's a global thing. And this is
It
maybe a
is.
place where the entire world needs to come together and say, "Hey, we're going to put aside resources for building space stuff because it's
Yeah.
that important for humanity that this stuff gets built."
Well,
And
India just went to the moon, right?
I think they sent a probe.
A
Yeah,
probe, right?
China has as well. They've been
Yeah.
like very successful. In fact, China also has their own space station too, because they were
Mhm.
uh, nudged out of the International Space Station. Like, go figure that one. They allow the Russians, but not the Chinese, huh?
Hmm.
And so they're like, well,
Interesting.
we'll build our own, and it's a pretty sweet station.
Hmm.
Um, but here's the thing: if we all were working together with this common goal of
But
space
it's made in
exploration,
China, so
that has a lot more weight than it used to, by the way. um it like if we work together, if this information were widely available and accessible for all and everybody was allowed to participate, well, yeah, it wouldn't take that long before we'd be out there among the stars exploring. I mean, if it is
hmm.
possible to go faster than light, that's the barricade that we're up against, the unknown of like,
Right.
can we actually go faster than the light? Because if that's not possible,
Or some
we're,
other fashion, right?
yeah, like my idea
Ending
was,
things or whatever, like
well, I
warping
had, yeah,
space.
I could figure out a way, like the only way I could think without light speed to travel great distances and still be alive is to use like a black hole, essentially to push a black hole, and you have your spacecraft hovering on the event horizon. And it doesn't matter how fast the black hole goes, because essentially for you, time is stopped. And then once you get to your destination, be it 1,000 years from now or 1,000,000 years from now, like you stop and psh, there you are. Time has barely passed. Although coming back to Earth would be interesting. Um,
Huh. A
but
black hole.
a black hole, a white hole. But it, yeah, I mean, who knows? Who knows what discoveries lie undiscovered, because everything is so closed and so competitive, right? To different countries, like, oh, I wouldn't work. We don't work together and stuff. No, we all need to work together because this is it's a big deal. And medicine is probably the same thing. It's like it doesn't matter where you go on planet Earth. A human is a human, and every human is susceptible to the same problems. And so I think we should all be working together for things, medical things as well.
Right.
And that requires openness. You cannot be closed and have progress occur. It just simply doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, when it comes to something like game systems or something, that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. So who cares that much about it? But I mean, it still should be open. Um, but stuff like space and well, I mean, it may be important at some point. Well, it not may, it will be important at some point when the giant flaming meteorite comes our way and we have not figured out a way to stop it because we've been too busy fighting each other, you know.
When it comes to free information, like if some patent holder were watching this episode and grasping his beer, like, oh, I want my idea. I just want to remind people that, like, sometimes even when you have all the schematics and all the data and you try to repeat something, it still won't work.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
cold fusion.
And you'll sit there thinking, like, what did I do wrong? And you might just kind of abandon ship, like
Mm-hmm.
there isn't going to be like an endless, like, steady flow of competition for every single thing, right? Like there's some things that are just a little bit too much for people to bite off and chew reasonably.
Well, and that's kind of going back to what you'd said before about the resources to affect a build of some sort, a creation.
Yeah.
If it were open, you have no shortage of people wanting to participate in putting this together. There are so many projects. One of my favorite games, actually, that I love so much is like the AMC team Total Conversion for Duke Nukem. Duke Nukem, by the way, both the Doom engine and Duke Nukem, and I think the old Quake engines are now open source. Like
Huh.
they released it fairly early on, but people have been improving on it, and now, like, yeah, the Duke 3D engine is incredible compared to what it was. But there are people who are building things based on that, and yeah, this Total Conversion team, they built this world essentially. People from all around the world worked on this project, like built
Whoa.
levels and put code together, did some fairly crude voice acting, but it's there nevertheless. But it's super fun, and it's like you can feel the fun
Come get some.
yeah. Oh yeah. It's and it's really cool. And that's just one little tiny project, but it's like that wouldn't have happened if it was we weren't working together as a planet, essentially.
Huh.
And you can take that and expand it to space. Like, what if the entire world were working on space stuff together and building
Yeah.
things? Imagine what it would look like. And that's kind of a Roddenberry-esque future, really, that it's like it wasn't just one country developing their own space
Right.
program or one company. It's like,
It's the
yeah, there
world.
might have been multiple countries and companies doing pieces and bits and stuff, but it all comes together and it's owned by the planet.
Yeah.
It's
I
a
mean,
product of our
there's no
whole
other
planet.
way it can be if you think about it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we can't go out into space and be like, yeah, so we're Texans, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. That would be
No, it
funny,
doesn't
wouldn't it?
work that way. We're from Earth,
Yeah.
like,
Well, at that point, it wouldn't matter. Like if you to an alien, they'd be looking at the Earth as a whole, not as like
right.
the different geographical lines we've artificially drawn.
Yeah.
Um,
You know, putting it out to the uh, world of commerce, why not just have a working experiment where we all say, hey, let's go 1 year completely free of patents and proprietary information and just see what happens.
that's that
You
would
know,
be the scientific way, honestly, and
the
that's
the economy might like correct for whatever changes, maybe not in a year, but like at
you
least
would
at the end of the
see.
year you might see like enough potential to be like, you know what, like let's see where this goes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
because
things
like,
like that do tend to happen. I mean, the whole COVID thing was a good example of that kind of loosening a little bit.
yeah.
Information sharing became a lot more free flowing because it
Mhm.
was an emergency, the global emergency. And I'm sure if we saw a giant flaming meteorite coming down, it would be similar, where
Yeah.
people would put aside all of these kinds of things and we'd come together and make it happen. But I think it needs to be permanent
Yeah.
because there's
I
a
mean,
lot of progress. We don't need to.
no matter what you look at, whether it's climate change or just resources in
Mhm.
general, like there is kind of, on a universal scale, like an emergency going on,
Yeah, there's a
and it's
lot of
still going on.
similar. There's quite a few things happening concurrently. Yeah, and it's like I don't, I don't know. It's just that the potential for so much good change is there, and
Yeah.
like, we don't need to just put aside our differences only during emergencies. Like that, just
Right.
that is
Right.
evidence right there that things like this work. We need to
Hmm.
carry that forward, and sure, maybe some of it would just be improvement in video game systems or I don't know, plumbing in houses or something like that, minuscule things, but it could be something grand, something amazing, a
Hmm.
world changing invention that
Yeah.
could only come into being if everybody could participate.
Plumbing is a great example because the entire world adopted that in favor of shitting out of a window.
Yeah.
You know,
Or the
like,
pans, like dumping the pans out of a window or a
right.
hole in the ground.
Yeah. Like there are there are obvious like ideas that take hold and become just kind of general knowledge.
Yeah.
And like,
It didn't
I mean,
take,
maybe it's like just a sign of the times, right? Like all that occurred before the whole idea of a patent. Maybe things would be different if the patent came before plumbing,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that could be. Well, and
But
like everybody uses USB not because
yeah.
of any kind of legislation, but because it just works. It just became the standard that everybody adopted. But before that, you had like serial and parallel connectors and PS2 and SCSI connectors and proprietary everything. And it's like, oh man, now it's just like, oh, hey, I buy a device. I know I can plug it into my machine unless it's Apple. Then, but that's
God damn it,
changing.
Apple.
I know that'll probably change in time.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's that just got adopted and because it just makes sense. But
Yeah.
if USB were locked down and were specially licensed or something, then companies building products would have to ask permission to use the standard, and then that would come with a cost, and they might be like, well, rather than use this because it's going to cost us millions of dollars for licensing, why don't we just develop our own standard? And then there you have it. You have confusion
Yeah.
and like it used to be for phone chargers and stuff. Remember those days back in like the 90s? Like every
Uh,
phone, not just a company, but every phone that a company made had a different charge cable. They were all different.
uh,
And now it's just like, oh yeah, USB-C, unless it's Apple. Um, but I mean, but at least with Apple, they kind of pretty much have their one standard. So it's kind of okay. Um,
right. Firewire or whatever it's called.
Lightning, I think.
Lightning. Yeah.
Yeah. Firewire was their older one that replaced stuff like Serial and things. And actually,
Light.
Firewire was a pretty good standard. In fact, I would almost say it was superior to USB. And
Hmm.
it's kind of sad it didn't really get widely adopted, especially for stuff like cameras and things. Um, but whatever.
We
It's,
have Apple. That. Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah. Huh. Well,
I think we brought up
wow.
some really interesting,
Yeah.
thought provoking points.
Yeah, that was a good kind of like probably a two-parter sort of thing. And I'm interested in the biohackers thing. I want to look into that and
You
maybe,
should. You will want to do a whole episode about that.
yeah,
It's super interesting.
that sounds right up my alley.
Mhm. And mine too, which is
Yeah.
an interesting convergence. Oh yeah. Well, I think that's enough for one or two episodes, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have exhausted my cold beer. So.
Oh yeah. Well, I'd like to hear people's comments down there in the comment section. What do you think about all this stuff? Let us know down there, and enjoy the song on the way out. I think it'll be a good one, hopefully.
Thanks for deep sink diving into all kinds of crazy shit.
Yep, as usual. Oh man. Well, everybody have a good day or a good night wherever you are. And whatever standard you have on the planet that you're on. I know you're out there watching us. Yeah, and take it easy.